In this video, we're talking about participants and participant roles, and the aim is to gradually become familiar with some of the terminology for talking about participant roles, the expected participant roles associated with events, and to begin to explore how participant roles might be inferred in context when we come across an event word in a text or in a conversation. Here's an example of the kind of issue we're going to look at. Here's an utterance. We are having the Smiths for dinner tonight. Can you think of two different ways that you could understand this utterance? One is that they are someone to share dinner with. The other is that they are actually going to be the thing consumed for dinner. In this example, the point is that the syntax, the word order in the case, isn't enough to clarify the role of the Smiths in this situation, though of course we could guess which they are. They're presumably going to be the person that we share dinner with, but we might want to have some words to use to talk about these two different options. What is the semantic role of the Smiths in this sentence? This is just one more example of linguistic underdeterminacy. The language doesn't make it clear what the role is, and we have to infer the intended meaning. Here we have to infer the intended role of the Smiths in the sentence, according to the principle of relevance, what seems most relevant in the context, which is almost always going to be that they are the people we are eating dinner with, rather than the thing we are eating. Here's another example from an advert. Fill a shoebox with your child. Again, can you see a couple of different ways of understanding this? One is that your child is the contents of the box, the thing that you're putting into the box, but that is not very likely. Much more likely your child is someone who is giving a helping hand to help you fill the box with something. And again, it'd be really useful if we had some words to describe this so we could explain clearly the semantic role that our mind is assigning to your child in this sentence. So at the start of this session, we're going to focus on learning some common terminology we can use to talk about the semantic roles of words like your child in this sentence, which will really help us when we're discussing semantics. So we're going to look at some terminology. Here's another example sentence. Phil gave flowers to Kate in a vase. In this sentence, let's look for the names we'd give to the roles of the different nouns in this sentence. Here we'd say that Phil is the agent. He's doing something deliberate, a deliberate action of giving the flowers. The flowers are what's called the theme, the thing that is given, the thing that is moving from one person or place to another. Kate is the recipient who gets the flowers, and the vase is some kind of location. Now, the name for these kind of semantic descriptions depends on what grammatical framework you're using. We're going to call them participant roles in this video. However, there are lots of other names you might come across when you hear linguists trying to explain this phenomena, or when you're looking on the internet to find out more about them. You might hear people talk about things like thematic relations, semantic functions, semantic roles, or even theta roles. But we've chosen to use participant roles. And in general, the terms and definitions we're going to be referring back to mostly are those used by Valin and LaPolla in his work on role and reference grammar, either his book Syntax or Van Berlen's own work called Exploring the Syntax Semantics Interface. He talks there about participant roles and thematic relations, but we'll just focus on the word participant roles. Now, there's a question when we're thinking about the semantics of participants involved in a particular state of affairs. We can think about this at different levels of granularity, different levels for describing what's happening. For example, we could choose some very specific semantic roles based just on the particular verb. And on this diagram, those are over here on the left-hand side. So when it said Phil gave some flowers to Kate in a vase, we could just say that Phil is the giver in the previous example. That could perhaps be helpful, but it's not really telling us much more than the verb itself says. Do givers act in some way like other semantic entities, other semantic roles? At the opposite end of the scale, where we have something very general, we have what Van Valin calls generalized semantic macro roles, and here he calls those actors and undergoers, and they're very important for the wider framework of role and reference grammar that he's written a lot about, but we're not going to go into those in this lesson at all. What we're focusing on is trying to get some useful level of generalization between these two extremes. We're trying to make semantic generalizations that may be relevant when thinking about how language works, whether that's to do with syntax or semantics. And I'm going to talk through some of the terms that are commonly used, and then talk a little bit about how our mind infers roles in context. So let's start with the idea of an agent. This is a willful or purposeful instigator of an event. For example, if we see Herod murdered his wife, then Herod is being conceptualized as an agent doing something deliberate. Or if we say the president resigned, again, this is not something you can do accidentally. It is a deliberate instigator of an event. A more general term for somebody who does something is an effector. Here it says the effector is a doer of an event which may or may not be deliberate or purposeful. A note, if we know that the action wasn't deliberate, specifically we know it was not deliberate, then the doer is an effector and not an agent. So for example, a puppy chewed my shoes. Well, how deliberate was the puppy in doing that? Whether you think he's an effector or an agent in this. Or John drove his car into a tree. Presumably this was accidentally rather than deliberate. So he would be an effector rather than an agent. There's some complexities here as to whether we're actually thinking about the semantics of the words that are used, or the verbs like chewing and driving. You might think that chewing and driving are verbs that do take deliberate actors doing them, therefore they would be agents. Or are we thinking about a state of affairs in which maybe John accidentally drove his car into a tree, and so we want to emphasize that he's an effector. And if you're getting in to explore this, they'll need to look into the literature more carefully and work out, well, what are we really talking about? Are we talking about affairs in the real world here, or are we talking about the semantic roles associated with these verbs? Also notice as you start looking into this, some frameworks won't distinguish between agents and effectors. It's particularly useful for some kind of languages that mark deliberate action specifically. Think of ergative languages if you've come across those or worked with those kind of languages. Other languages, they might just lump them all together and call them all actors, and that might be sufficient. Another role here we have is an instrument. An instrument is normally an inanimate entity used by an agent to carry out an event. And you'll see I've got a picture of a crowbar here, which might be such an instrument. But also things like stones. In this sentence, he broke the window with a stone. Or here, the thief used a crowbar to open the door. The instrument is what we use, the name of the role here, the thing we use to do something. Notice it's not quite the same, perhaps, as an implement, although they're very similar. So when you say something like, I ate porridge with a spoon, you maybe say the spoon is an instrument, but it may be more, let's say to specify it, actually it's an implement which can't do something independently on its own. We can't say the spoon ate porridge, whereas you could say crowbar opened the door or the stone broke the window. It's the spoon is not part of the causal chain. It can't be worded as an independent effector. And if that's a relevant distinction in a language you work with, you might want to separate implements from instruments. Another role that people talk about sometimes is a force. These are a bit like instruments, but they can't be manipulated. It includes things like tornadoes and storms, things like that. They're also like kind of effectors, a particular kind of effector that doesn't have any intention or will behind it. So we've got things like the flood washed away the village. Flood is a force. His car was dented by a falling branch. Falling branch is a force. Anxiety can ruin your health. Again, maybe anxiety is some kind of force. It's not an effector which has a purpose or a plan. It's not really a doer here. And another category are a variety of semantic roles that we can think of as being experiencers. So an experiencer is slightly different from an effector or a doer of something. They're someone who experiences something, typically a sentient being that experiences an internal state. And there are a variety of different kinds of experiences, and you'll find that some languages treat them all in the same way with the same kind of markings. Some languages have some of them one way, some of them a different way. They're all different kinds of internal states, and it's important to recognize these differences. So we have a difference between perceivers, cognizers, and emoters. First of all, cognizers are people who are thinking or doing mental reflection, right? So, for example, Philip was thinking about his mother, and Philip, the role of Philip is the cognizer, and the thing he is cognizing about, his mother, that is the content. So we have a cognizer and the content that they're thinking about. Other things might be knowing, realizing, words like that have cognizer and content roles associated with them. Then there are another set of verbs that have emotional participant roles connected with them. So we have here, Mary Jane hates rice pudding. Here we'd say that Mary Jane is the emoter and rice pudding is the target, the thing that she hates. This would also be true for somebody loving something, liking something. All those kind of words would have the participant roles of an emoter and a target. And then finally, there are lots of a set of verbs that have a perceiver and a stimulus. Thing that is perceived. The thing that is perceived is called the stimulus. So here we have the example, his whole life flashed before him. In this sentence, him has the role of the perceiver, the one who is seeing something, and stimulus is his whole life that flashes before him. And these are the words you'd use also with smelling something, seeing something, hearing something, touching something, perhaps. We'd have a perceiver and a stimulus. Next, we have a patient. A patient is something that is in a state or a condition, or it undergoes a change of state or condition. So here we have an example. The soldier shot the prisoner. The prisoner has gone through undergone a change of state or condition from presumably being alive to being dead, from being not shot to being shot. His mother fell ill. She has undergone a change of state from being well to being ill. John is tall. Notice John here is also a patient. John is in the state of being tall. The child ate the cake. Here the cake is a patient. The child is an effector, perhaps, or a consumer if you wanted to be specific. The cake has gone from a state of existing to not existing. So actually, sometimes words like the cake are put in a particular category here. Things that are eaten can go into the category of consumed. That's the participant role, because they go from existing to not existing, having been eaten or drunk as a result of the expression that's given. So there's a whole lot of patients there. Another interesting distinction for patients is the possibility of some patients that you might think of as creations. Creations are patients that, or participants that are created rather than just changing state. So they don't exist beforehand, and now they come into existence as part of the utterance. So for example, Mary fried an egg. The egg is a patient because the egg is changing from being raw to being cooked. The egg was there at the beginning and at the end. Whereas Mary made an omelette, The omelette is a creation. The omelette did not exist at the start. It was just a set of eggs and cheese and herbs and whatever. And at the end, we have an omelette. So the omelette role might be considered a creation. Or here's another example. John read a book. Well, the book doesn't, it isn't created through the action of this. The book just goes through a change of state from being unread to being read. Whereas John wrote a book, the book didn't exist at the beginning, and now it does exist. So we might call this a creation. I've heard that this is relevant in sign language, for example, that normal patients occur before the verb, I think, whereas creations might occur after the verb. Something that I think there's a word order switch depending on whether you have a patient or a creation, in British Sign Language at least. Another role is the benefactive. This is the person or the participant for whom some event is performed, participant for whose benefit this event is done. So here's an example in English. Mum is baking a cake for me. I'm the one who's going to benefit from this cake. Or she mixed James a cocktail, shaken, not stirred. She's doing something for James here. So notice in English, sometimes we have the word for to mark the benefactive participant. Sometimes we don't have any preposition before it, just she mixed James a cocktail. And then a recipient. Recipient is someone who actually gets something, whereas a benefactive is someone for whom something is done. They don't necessarily get the thing. The recipient is someone who actually gets something. A recipient is always animate or a quasi-animate entity like an organization or something. So here we have some examples. Don sent a card to Annabelle. Annabelle receives it, so Annabelle is the recipient. Have you paid the taxi driver? The taxi driver is receiving some money here, so the taxi driver is a recipient. Yolanda is buying the dog from Bill. Yolanda here is interesting as an agent because she's doing the buying, but she's also a recipient of the dog. So what are the things that are perhaps being given to a recipient? These are typically themes or sometimes called figures. Themes are things which are located or undergo a change of location. So compare that with a patient, which we heard about a few minutes ago. A patient is something that is in a state or undergoes a change of state, like somebody being tall, somebody becoming ill, somebody being shot. Whereas here we have themes which are located or undergo a change of location. So let's look at some examples of this. There is a book on the table. Okay, the book is in a location on the table, so it is a theme. He put the money on the counter. The money is a theme, it's in a particular place. The coffee splashed all over the table. Again, the coffee is a theme, it is in a particular place. And located with the theme, we have the location where it is. So the location is a place of spatial locus of an event or a state. So again, back to our example of the book is on the table. The book is the theme, but the table here is the location where you'll find it. Bob is eating a sandwich in the kitchen. The kitchen, again, is the location of where Bob is, where the action is taking place. So just back to that previous example, Bob again would be the theme here. The sandwich would be the patient that's being consumed, and the kitchen is the location. Also, for things that are moving, we have a source. So this is a particular kind of location. The source is the point of origin of an event or a state. So, for example, if David gave a book to Kristen, the book is the theme, Kristen is the recipient, and David is the source of the book, as well as being an agent. Larry sent a package to Baltimore, and Larry is a source here of this. Larry and David are both agents and sources. And we can see here the initial position is the thing that's in X. The object is in Y, that's the theme, and located under Z there, the final position where something ends up. And we notice that if Y is transferred, then Z is a recipient. So David gave a book to Kristen. The book is the theme. Kristen is the recipient. But if it's something that's in motion, then we don't know if it's actually arrived there or not. And Baltimore isn't something that can receive something. Baltimore is the goal, where it is being sent to. And the package here is, again, the theme. I notice that here. In both cases, X is the source and Y is the theme. So David and Larry are the sources, the book and the package are the themes. Kristen is a recipient and Baltimore is a goal. Here are a few more goals. Goals are similar to recipients, but they're often inanimate things. So we just had the example of Larry sending a package to Baltimore. Another example, I drove my car to the scrapyard. That was the goal, where I was going. Then also to do with these location ones, we've had sources, we've had goals. We can also have a path, a route. So here we've got Quentin was jogging along the road. Along the road here has the role of a path. Quentin jogged across the road to the park, then across the road is a path, and to the park here is the goal. The ball bounced down the hill. Again, down the hill is the path. Now, note, we've given lots of examples here, but this is not an exhaustive list. And if you start looking around for this, you'll find some other schemes using different definitions. So if you're using this any kind of write-up, make sure you cite whose terminology and definitions you're using, where you've got your information from, how are you defining a path or a destination or a recipient or a patient. There's lots of information out there that you can use to explore this further. Here are a few roles that are sometimes helpful when talking particularly about states. And these come from Van Valin's Exploring the Semantics Interface. We've talked about patient, theme, and location, which are used for some states, but these terms might be some that are useful for other states that you might find in texts that you're looking at and trying to explore. These are all things that are represented by the word is in English, but the word is can represent a variety of different semantic situations. So we have something like Pat is tall. A minute ago, we talked about Pat just being a patient here, but another way of describing this is a attributive relationship where you might say Pat is the attributant and tall is the attribute that is given to Pat. Or you have examples like this, Kim is a lawyer. In this case, the role of Kim is the one who's being identified as having a particular identity or a kind of identity. Kim fits in the class of things that have the identity of lawyer, and this might be called a identificational statement here, predicate perhaps. And the roles would be the identified and the identity. And they're slightly different from this example where Chris is the winner. So there's only one winner here, as opposed to in the previous example with a lawyer, there could be many things that could be a lawyer, but only one thing can be the winner. So the winner we might think of as a variable, and Chris has the value of being the one who is the winner. So these roles you might call a value and a variable. And then finally, we have two things which are said to be the same. So this is an equational situation. And the two things here we have, like Kim's sister is Sandy's lawyer. So we're saying this referent is the same as this other referent in the real world. So the roles here, we might talk about them as being referents, and this is an equational predicate. This just might be useful if you're looking at this kind of example in your text. Finally, let's spend a little bit of time talking about how we infer participant roles in context, moving away from the terminology to what is our brain actually doing when we come across an event word in a text. So the point is that participant roles are associated with and evoked by certain words. We might call these syntagmatic anchors. That's how Schmidt talks about them in this book, Dynamics of the Linguistic System, that you might think that verbs or other event words, when we come across them in an utterance or in a text, they evoke certain roles. And that makes our mind think, what kind of things we're going to expect to see in the text around this. It constrains our expectations of what kind of roles nearby words play and the way they are linked together. Often only some of the evoked roles, so our mental frameworks evoke a whole load of different roles, but only certain ones of those will have explicit participants filling them in the text. Let's look at that, think about that with the word build, what participants may be evoked by that word, i.e. what participants may be connected with the mental concept build that is evoked by that word. One of them might be the agent, like Bob, or the builders who built something. Another might be the creation, the thing that is built, whether it's a model plane, a garden shed, or a computer. The thing that is being used to build something else. This would be the material, whether it's the bricks and mortar, the wood, something else. Perhaps the person who something is built for. That would be the benefactive that we've just talked about. Built for me, for my son, for another family member. And then we've got things like the trowel, the glue, the spirit level, the hands. These might be the instruments or the implements that are used for doing the building. Those are also evoked by the idea of build. So we have these various different roles, the agent, the creation, the material, the instrument, the benefactive, that could all be evoked. They're all potentially linked with the concept build, even if they aren't required by the grammar of a particular language. And they take different grammatical roles. You can see those in English. So in English, we need to have generally have a subject, either explicit or implied, and the subject's either going to be the agent or it's going to be the creation if we have a passive sentence like the shed was built. And then somewhat optional, we have things like the object, the creation that's been built, the objects of prepositions. For example, we will have the instrument might be in a with prepositional phrase. He built it with his hands. He built it with a cement mixer. And then linked with the preposition for, you're going to have the benefactive, typically, like he built a house for his son. But notice when you have something like he built a shed for money, money isn't the benefactive here. It has some slightly different participant role that might be worth thinking about. And you could look at sentences in English to try and map all this out and see for any word that you're looking for, what are the kind of frames around it? What are the different prepositional phrases and objects, participant roles that might occur with different prepositions, for example. So here we've done this for build, like if you looked at the sentence, he is building, we're seeing the agent, but we don't have the creation, the material, or the instrument, even though these may be accessible in the knowledge frame. They're not there explicitly in the grammar. He's building a garden shed, then we have the agent and the creation explicit. He built with bricks and mortar, then we have the agent and the material explicit. He built with a mechanized cement mixer. Got the agent here and the instrument explicit. He built a house for his second wife, then he is explicit. The creation, the house is explicit, and the benefactive for his second wife is explicit. Probably sounds a bit odd to say he built for his second wife without the creation being there. So maybe if we have the benefactive, we need to have the creation as well. He built a hut with his own hands. Maybe here we have the agent, the creation, the hut, and the instrument, his own hands. I wanted to show you a particular example of how this might work in our minds. An example that one of my students shared with me. They saw this sign in Gloucester, crib donations for Gloucester and District Samaritans and Gloucester Food Bank. Thank you. This is quite an interesting sign here. It's obviously trying to get you to do something because it's there's some kind of speech act here, some kind of point of these words, because it says thank you at the end. So what is it trying to do? Oh, well, what is it trying to get you to do? You see the word donations in here. Donations linked to a word like donate, and our mind starts thinking, okay, I know the word donate. It's to do with giving something, so I'm expecting somebody who's doing the giving, some kind of agent, somebody who's doing the donating, something that they are donating. And the question is, what are they donating? That would be the theme, presumably, something that's changing location, and a benefactor probably, so it's being donated for, and that's clear here, for Gloucester and District Samaritans and Gloucester Food Bank. So the benefactor is explicit, Gloucester and District Samaritans and Gloucester Food Bank. So the question is, what fits the role of what is being donated? And this is the challenge. Our brain is trying to infer this. It's inferred there should be a role of something being donated. Well, what is it? Maybe we think it's the crib that should be donated. Does the crib have the role of the theme here? That doesn't really make sense. Do people want us to give cribs to Gloucester and District Samaritans? Not totally sure about that, so our mind's continuing to think, well, if not, what is the point of the crib here? What's that word being used? Actually, in this case, the crib is the location. It's stuck on a, what do you call it? A tableau. It's a creation, an artistic representation of Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus. And it's got a crib there, a crib being a kind of bed cot with Jesus in it. So maybe the point is it's the location for us to put things into to be donated. But again, it's in this particular case, it was behind a glass window. So there's no way you could put anything into the crib. So that doesn't make sense in context. The crib is the location to put something into it. I went and had a look at this myself after my student had taken a photo, and I discovered down low beside it, there was a little slot to put money or envelopes through into this place. And then suddenly it became clear the thing that's supposed to be donated and is totally implicit is the money, some kind of money to be donated. And then the crib is this whole panorama, this thing that's been created. And we're supposed to, at that location, when we're there, donate some money into the box that's down there. But all of that, I have to infer in context, and I'm inferring a lot of that from the participant roles connected with the word donate, and here the word donations. So for some investigation and reflection, do have a look at a few events in text you're reading and analyze them. Take a few words and think, well, what are the participant roles involved? So you might like to, if you find a verb, a nice verb, think, when I hear this verb, what are the kind of participants I think might be involved? Is it a theme and a recipient and a source? Or is it an agent and a patient? What are the typical things I expect with this verb? And then how are those roles encoded in the grammar of the language? And are they obligatory or not? Maybe when you're looking at particular texts or examples, you'll find that some of those roles have metaphorical elements in them, metaphorical noun phrases. And if so, how does your mind process them? How does your mind work with it? Those are things to think about. So think about how might participant roles differ across different languages and cultures, and how might they be relevant for your work?